The morning sky over Seoul looked normal until the shadows began to fall. Hyunwoo was feeding pigeons outside the university when the first dark shapes appeared above the clouds. He squinted up at what looked like massive black dots growing, larger by the second. His phone buzzed with emergency alerts, the news apps filled with confused reports from around the world. Giant ships had appeared over every major city on Earth. The vessels were so large they blocked out the sun in places. Hyunwoo worked at Seoul National University studying birds. He had spent 10 years watching how crows solved problems and how sparrows worked together. Today felt different, though. The pigeons around his feet seemed nervous. They kept looking up at the sky and making soft, worried sounds. The alien ships hung in the air like floating mountains. They were dark gray with strange curves and spikes. Each one was bigger than the largest building in the city. People stopped walking and driving to stare up at them. Car horns honked as traffic jams formed everywhere. So-min was at the military base when the first reports came in. She worked in communications and had never seen the officers so worried. The radar screens showed the alien ships but nothing else. Made sense. The ships gave off no heat signatures. They made no radio signals. They just waited in the sky like sleeping giants. The commander called everyone to the main room. His face was pale as he spoke to the assembled soldiers and staff. Have confirmed visual contact with unknown vessels over 47 cities worldwide, he said. We do not know their intentions. All military units are on high alert. So-min watched the live feeds from around the world. The ships looked the same everywhere. Tokyo, New York, London, Moscow. Every major population center had at least one hanging above it. Then the broadcasts started. Every television, radio, and internet connection on Earth received the same message at exactly noon. The voice spoke in perfect English, then repeated in dozens of other languages. It sounded cold and mechanical. People of Earth. We are the Vorthak Empire. We have conquered 43 worlds before yours. You will surrender immediately or face the consequences. We give you 1 hour to respond. The message played 3 times and then stopped. The world fell into chaos. Phone networks crashed as everyone tried to call family. Military jets scrambled but kept their distance from the alien ships. World leaders held emergency meetings. Hyunwoo walked back to his office in the bird research building. The pigeons had scattered when the broadcast started. Even the crows that usually begged for food had disappeared. The campus was almost empty, as students ran home or gathered around televisions. His research partner Jin-ho was in the lab watching the news. Jin-ho studied bird behavior patterns and had worked with Hyunwoo for 5 years. What do you think they want? Jin-ho asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. I don't know, Hyunwoo replied. But look outside. Have you seen any birds since the ships arrived? Jin-ho looked out the window. The trees and power lines that were usually full of birds were completely empty. Even the sparrows that lived in the building's eaves had vanished. That's strange, Jin-ho said. Birds don't usually react to aircraft anymore. They're used to planes and helicopters. These aren't normal aircraft, Hyunwoo said quietly. The hour deadline passed with no response from Earth's governments. The world's leaders couldn't agree on what to do. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to negotiate. Most were simply too shocked to make any decision. At exactly 1 o'clock, the ships began to open. Massive doors slid apart on the bottom of each vessel. Dark shapes started falling from the openings. They looked like huge meteors at first, but then deployed parachute-like membranes that slowed their descent. The first one landed in the center of Seoul with a crash that shook buildings for miles. When the dust cleared, something impossible stood in the crater. It looked like a mammoth, but wrong in every way. The creature stood 15 feet tall with thick gray skin that seemed to glow with an inner light. Its tusks were metallic and sharp, as swords. Instead of a normal trunk, it had what looked like a cannon with multiple barrels. More creatures landed around the city. Each one was the same massive size. They had 6 legs instead of 4, and their eyes glowed red in the daylight. Strange symbols were carved into their armored hide. The military tried to respond quickly. Tanks rolled through the streets toward the landing sites. Helicopters circled overhead. Soldiers set up positions behind buildings and barriers. The first tank that got close to one of the creatures fired its main gun. The shell hit the mammoth thing directly in the chest. The creature didn't even stumble. The shell seemed to bounce off its skin like a rubber ball. Then the creature opened its mouth and roared. The sound was like thunder mixed with a scream. Windows shattered for blocks around. People covered their ears and fell to their knees. The creature raised its trunk cannon and fired back. A beam of green light shot out and hit the tank directly. The entire vehicle melted like ice in a fire. The soldiers inside didn't even have time to scream. Similar scenes played out in every city with a creature landing. Military weapons had no effect. The mammoth things seemed designed for war. Their skin was armor. Their trunks were weapons. They moved with surprising speed for their huge size. Du-Yan was 8 years old and lived near the university. She had been feeding pigeons in the park every day after school for 2 years. The birds knew her and would land on her hands to eat the seeds she brought. When the creatures landed, Du-Yan was hiding under a bench in the park with her mother. They could see one of the mammoth things walking down the main street, crushing cars under its massive feet. But Du-Yan noticed something her mother didn't see. Birds were coming back. Not just a few, but hundreds of them. Crows, sparrows, pigeons, and even small finches were gathering in the trees around the park. They weren't making normal bird sounds. They seemed to be talking to each other in quiet chirps and clicks. The crows were picking up small stones in their beaks. The sparrows were doing the same with tiny pebbles. "Mom, look at the birds," Du-Yan whispered. Her mother was too scared to pay attention. But Du-Yan watched as more and more birds arrived. They came from every direction, carrying stones and twigs in their beaks and claws. The mammoth creature stopped near the park. It seemed to be scanning the area with its glowing red eyes. People were screaming and running in every direction. Then, the first crow attacked. It dove down from a tree and dropped a stone right onto the creature's head. The stone was small, maybe the size of a marble. It hit the mammoth thing between the eyes and bounced off harmlessly. But the creature noticed. It looked up at the tree where the crow had been. Its eyes seemed confused, as if it couldn't understand what had just happened. More crows joined the attack. They dove and dropped stones, aiming for the same spot on the creature's head. The mammoth thing tried to swat them away with its trunk cannon, but the birds were too fast and too many. Du-Yan watched in amazement as hundreds of birds began circling the confused creature. They worked together like a team, taking turns diving and dropping stones. The attacks weren't hurting the mammoth thing, but they were definitely annoying it. The creature gave up trying to catch the birds and continued walking down the street. But the birds followed it, continuing their stone attacks. More birds kept arriving from every direction. Hyunwoo saw the same thing happening from his office window. Birds were swarming around the mammoth creature that had landed near the university. They seemed organized, like they had a plan. "Jinho, are you seeing this?" he called to his partner. Jinho joined him at the window. They watched as the birds attacked the giant creature in coordinated waves. It was unlike any animal behavior either scientist had ever seen. "This isn't normal," Jinho said. "Birds don't cooperate across species like this." "No," Hyunwoo agreed. "But maybe they understand something we don't." The first day of the invasion ended with the mammoth creatures controlling every major city on Earth. Human military forces had been defeated easily. The aliens had barely tried. But as night fell, the birds were still attacking, and more were coming from every direction carrying stones in their beaks. The second day of the invasion started with strange reports from around the world. The mammoth creatures had spent the night destroying military bases and government buildings. Human weapons still could not hurt them. But something else was happening that no one expected. Hyunwoo arrived at his office early in the morning. He had barely slept because of the constant sounds outside. Not the sounds of destruction, but the sounds of birds. Thousands and thousands of birds had been active all night. Jinho was already in the lab when Hyunwoo arrived. He looked tired but excited. "You need to see this," Jinho said, pointing to his computer screen. "I've been watching security cameras from around the city all night." The video showed one of the mammoth creatures walking down a main street. But it wasn't moving normally. It kept stopping and shaking its head. Birds were diving at it constantly, dropping stones with perfect aim. "Look at this part," Jinho said, pointing to the screen. "Watch the crows." In the video, a group of crows landed on a building near the mammoth creature. They were not carrying random stones anymore. Each crow had picked up the same type of small gray rock. They waited until the creature was directly below them, then all dropped their stones at exactly the same time. The stones hit the creature's head in the same spot. This time, the mammoth thing stumbled slightly. It wasn't hurt, but it was clearly bothered by the attack. "They're learning," Hyunwoo said quietly. "The birds are learning how to fight these things." "It gets better," Jinho said, switching to another video. "Look at this footage from Tokyo." This video showed sparrows working together in a way that seemed impossible. Hundreds of tiny birds had gathered small pebbles and were dropping them in organized patterns. They created lines of falling stones that forced the mammoth creature to change direction. "The sparrows are hurting it," Jinho explained. "They're using the stone drops to make the creature go where they want it to go." Hyunwoo watched in amazement. In his 10 years of studying bird behavior, he had never seen anything like this. Birds from different species were working together. They were using tools in new ways. They were solving problems that should have been too complex for their small brains. At the military base, Somin was dealing with reports that made no sense. Soldiers in the field were calling in to say that the mammoth creatures were having trouble moving through certain areas. The creatures seemed confused and kept changing direction. "Sir, you need to hear this," Somin said to her commander. She played a recording from a soldier in the field. "The creature was heading straight for the hospital," the soldier's voice said through static. "Then these birds started attacking it, hundreds of them. They kept dropping rocks on its head until it turned around and went the other way." The commander frowned. "Birds? These things destroyed our best tanks. You're telling me birds are stopping them?" "That's what the field reports say, sir. The creatures aren't being hurt, but they're definitely being bothered. Some of them have stopped moving completely because the bird attacks are so constant." Somin pulled up a map on her computer. Red dots showed where the mammoth creatures had landed. Green dots showed where they had been spotted during the night. "Look at the pattern," she said. "The creatures that landed near parks and forests are moving much slower than the ones in areas with fewer birds, and some of them have actually moved away from populated areas." The commander studied the map. "Are you saying the birds are protecting us?" "I don't know, sir. But something is definitely happening that we don't understand." Across the city, Ara was in her geology lab at the university. She specialized in studying rocks and minerals. Jinho had called her early that morning with an unusual request. "I need you to look at these stones the birds are using," Jinho had said. "There's something special about them." Ara examined the small gray rocks under her microscope. They all looked similar. But when she tested their composition, she found something interesting. "These aren't random stones," she told Jinho when he arrived at her lab. "The birds are choosing rocks with very specific mineral content." She showed him the test results on her computer. "Look at this. Every stone has high levels of iron oxide and traces of rare metals. It's like the birds know exactly what type of rock they need." "Need for what?" Jinho asked. "I'm not sure yet. But these minerals create specific vibrations when they hit hard surfaces. Maybe the mammoth creatures are sensitive to certain frequencies." Meanwhile, Do-yeon was in the park with her mother again. They had spent the night in a shelter but came back during the day to check on their apartment. The mammoth creature that had been in their area was gone, but the birds were still everywhere. Do-yeon sat on her usual bench and pulled out some seeds from her pocket. The pigeons she normally fed were there, but they seemed different. They approached her more carefully and looked at her with what seemed like intelligence. One of the pigeons landed on her hand as usual. But instead of just eating the seeds, it looked directly into her eyes. Then it made a series of soft cooing sounds that almost seemed like it was trying to talk to her. "Mom, I think this pigeon is trying to tell me something," Do-yeon said. Her mother was too worried about their situation to pay much attention. But Do-yeon kept listening to the pigeon sounds. Other birds started gathering around her. Crows, sparrows, and even some seagulls that normally stayed near the river. The birds seemed to be having a conversation with each other. They made different sounds and moved their heads in specific ways. Doyun had fed birds for 2 years, but she had never seen them act like this. One of the crows hopped closer to her feet. It was carrying a small stone in its beak. The crow set the stone down carefully in front of Doyun, then looked up at her expectantly. "I think it wants me to take the stone," Doyun told her mother. "Don't touch it, honey. We don't know if it's safe." But Doyun was curious. She picked up the stone and examined it. It was smooth and felt warm in her hand. The crow made a pleased sound and flew to a nearby tree. More birds started bringing stones to Doyun, each one carefully placed. Its stone near her feet then looked at her as if waiting for approval. Soon she had a small pile of similar gray rocks. The birds seemed satisfied and began to leave. But before they flew away, each one looked directly at Doyun and made a specific sound. It was almost like they were saying goodbye. Back at the university, Hyunwoo and Jinho were analyzing more video footage. They had collected security camera recordings from around the world through the internet. The same bird behavior was happening everywhere. "Look at this footage from New York," Jinho said. "The pigeons there are using the same tactics as the ones in Seoul. And this one from London," Hyunwoo added. "The crows are all targeting the same spots on the creatures." They watched video after video. In every city, birds were organizing to attack the mammoth creatures. But more importantly, they were all using the same methods. Birds that had never met each other were following the same battle plans. "This is impossible," Jinho said. "How can birds in different countries be coordinating like this?" "I don't know," Hyunwoo replied. "But they're definitely communicating somehow. And they're learning fast." Ara called them in the afternoon with more test results. "I figured out why the birds are choosing these specific stones," she said, excitedly. "The mineral composition creates ultrasonic vibrations when the stones hit the creatures, frequencies that humans can't hear, but that might be painful to the aliens. So the birds aren't just annoying the creatures," Hyunwoo said. "They're actually hurting them in a way we can't detect." "Exactly. And there's more. I tested stones from different locations around the city. The birds in each area are choosing rocks with slightly different compositions. It's like they're adjusting their weapons based on what works best against each individual creature." That evening, Somin received a report that changed everything. A mammoth creature in downtown Seoul had stopped moving completely. It was standing in the middle of a street, surrounded by thousands of birds that were taking turns dropping stones on its head. "The creature has been standing there for 6 hours, the field report said. "It's not attacking anything. It's not moving. It just stands there while the birds hit it with rocks." Somin realized that the birds weren't just defending against the creatures. They were winning. These tiny animals with their small stones were doing what the entire human military could not do. They were stopping the unstoppable alien weapons. But the most surprising discovery came that night. Hyunwoo was watching the bird attacks through binoculars from his office window when he noticed something new. The birds were starting to use different tactics. Some crows had learned to drop stones from higher altitudes for more impact. Some sparrows were working in teams to carry larger rocks together, and some pigeons were actually modifying their stones, using their beaks to sharpen the edges. "Jinho, come look at this," Hyunwoo called. "The birds are improving their weapons." Jinho looked through the binoculars and saw what Hyunwoo meant. A group of crows had found some metal scraps and were attaching them to stones with pieces of wire. They were making their simple stone weapons more effective. "They're not just learning," Jinho said in amazement. "They're innovating. They're actually developing new technology." As the second day ended, the third day brought revelations that changed everything humanity thought they knew about the birds. Hyunwoo woke up to find his office window covered with small pieces of paper. When he looked closer, he realized they were not random scraps. The birds had arranged them in patterns. Jinho was already at the university, staring at similar patterns on windows throughout the building. Each arrangement looked like a map, with small stones marking specific locations. "The birds left these overnight," Jinho explained when Hyunwoo arrived. "Look at this pattern. These stone markers match exactly with the locations where the mammoth creatures are positioned around the city." Hyunwoo studied the improvised maps. The birds had used twigs, leaves, and small rocks to create detailed layouts of Seoul. They had marked not just where the creatures were now, but where they had been and where they seemed to be heading. "They're sharing intelligence," Hyunwoo said quietly. "The birds are creating battle maps." At the military base, Somin was receiving reports that seemed impossible. Field teams reported seeing birds carrying messages between different areas of the city. Crows would pick up small objects from one location and fly them to bird groups in other neighborhoods. "Ma'am, you need to see this video," one of her assistants said. The security footage showed something that made Somin sit down. In shock, a crow had landed near a damaged military radio. The bird examined the device carefully, then began pressing buttons with its beak. The radio crackled to life, and the crow listened to the military communications for several minutes before flying away. "Run that video again," Somin ordered. She watched as the crow operated the radio with clear purpose. The bird was not randomly pushing buttons. It understood what the device was for. "Get me Dr. Hyunwoo at the university immediately," Somin told her communications team. When Hyunwoo arrived at the military base an hour later, Somin showed him dozens of similar videos. Birds were interacting with human technology in ways that should have been impossible. They were using abandoned smartphones to access weather reports. They were examining GPS devices left by soldiers. Some were even attempting to operate simple machinery. "Dr. Hyunwoo, what exactly are we dealing with here?" Somin asked. Hyunwoo watched the videos with growing amazement. "I think the birds are learning at an accelerated rate. The threat from the aliens has somehow triggered rapid evolution in their intelligence." "How rapid?" Somin asked. "Based on what I'm seeing, they're gaining new abilities every few hours. Yesterday they were using simple tools. Today they're operating complex devices and creating strategic maps." Duyan had discovered something even more surprising. She had returned to the park that morning to find the birds waiting for her. But this time, they had brought her something special. The pigeons she normally fed had constructed a small structure from twigs and wire. It looked almost like a miniature building, with different sections and levels. Inside each section, they had placed different types of stones. "Mom, look what the birds made for me," Doyan called to her mother. Her mother approached carefully. The structure was clearly intentional, not a random nest. Each section contained stones of a specific color and size. It was organized like a library or storage facility. One of the pigeons landed near Doyan and made a series of sounds. Then it walked to the structure and touched one section with its beak. The section contained white stones. The pigeon looked back at Doyan and repeated the sounds. "I think it's trying to teach me something," Doyan said. The pigeon moved to another section containing gray stones and made different sounds. Then it went to a section with black stones and made yet different sounds. Doyan realized the pigeon was showing her a language. Different sounds meant different types of stones. The bird was teaching her to communicate. Yoonji, a child psychologist, had been brought in to study Doyan and other children who seemed to be interacting with the birds. She was amazed by what she observed. "The birds are specifically choosing children to communicate with," Yoonji reported to the research team. "We've identified 12 children around the city who are having similar experiences. The birds seem to prefer young humans over adults." "Why children?" Hyunwoo asked. "Children's minds are more flexible," Yoonji explained. "They're better at learning new languages and adapting to new situations." The birds seemed to understand this. Aira had made her own breakthrough in understanding the stones. She had analyzed samples from bird collections around the world and found something remarkable. "The birds aren't just choosing stones randomly," she explained to the team. "They're selecting minerals that create specific chemical reactions when combined." She showed them test results on her computer. When these different stone types are mixed together and crushed, they create compounds that are toxic to the alien creature's biology. "So the birds aren't just using physical weapons," Jinhoo said. "They're creating chemical weapons." "Exactly. And they're doing it instinctively, without any understanding of chemistry as we know it. They just somehow know which combinations work." The military had begun to take the bird intelligence seriously. Tae-ho, a strategic planner, was assigned. to study the birds' tactics and see if humans could learn from them. The birds are using classic military strategies, Tejo reported. They're conducting reconnaissance, coordinating attacks, and adapting their tactics based on enemy responses. He showed tactical maps comparing bird behavior to human military doctrine. Look at this. The birds are using pincer movements, diversionary attacks, and concentrated fire on weak points. These are sophisticated battle plans. But how are they coordinating across such large distances? So-Min asked. We think they've developed a communication network, Tejo explained. Birds are natural long-distance travelers. They're using their existing migration routes to carry information between cities. The breakthrough came when Hyunwoo realized that the birds were not just reacting to the alien threat. They were actively studying the mammoth creatures and developing countermeasures. Security cameras around the city showed birds conducting what could only be called experiments. Groups of crows would test different attack methods on the same creature, carefully observing the results. Sparrows would try various stone types and record which ones were most effective. They're using the scientific method, Hyunwoo told the assembled team. The birds are forming hypotheses, testing them and modifying their approach based on the results. The most shocking discovery came from analyzing the bird communication patterns. Jin-ho had been recording bird sounds throughout the crisis and found that their vocalizations had become much more complex. Listen to this recording from 3 days ago. Jin-ho played audio of normal bird sounds. Now listen to this from this morning. The difference was clear. The birds were using longer sequences of sounds with more variation and apparent meaning. They had developed what could only be called a sophisticated language. They're sharing detailed information, Jin-ho explained. Not just simple warnings or location data, but complex tactical information about enemy weaknesses and attack effectiveness. Du-Yun had become the best human interpreter of the new bird language. She could understand basic communications and even respond in ways the birds seemed to comprehend. The pigeons told me something important, Do-Yun explained to the research team. They said the mammoth creatures have a weak spot behind their left front leg, but they can only hit it if they attack from 3 different directions at the same time. Yoonji translated for the adults. Du-Yun has learned to communicate complex tactical information with the birds. They're treating her as part of their strategic planning. That afternoon, the birds demonstrated their most impressive capability yet. Coordinated attacks began happening simultaneously in cities around the world. Birds in Seoul, Tokyo, New York, and London all began identical assault patterns at exactly the same time. There's no way they could coordinate this without some form of global communication, So-Min realized. The birds have created a worldwide intelligence network. The mammoth creatures were clearly struggling now. Several had stopped moving entirely. Others were trying to hide in buildings or underground areas where birds couldn't easily reach them. But the birds adapted to that too. Smaller species like finches and wrens began infiltrating the hiding places. They carried tiny amounts of the toxic stone dust and released it in enclosed spaces where the creatures sought shelter. The birds are outthinking the aliens, Tejo observed. Every time the creatures try a new defensive strategy, the birds counter it within hours. Hyunwoo made the final connection that explained everything. The birds aren't just individually intelligent. They've formed a collective consciousness. Every bird on Earth is now part of a single planet-wide intelligence network. What does that mean for us? So-Min asked. It means Earth now has a defense system that the aliens never encountered before. They've faced individual species with weapons and technology, but they've never faced an entire planet's ecosystem working together as one unified intelligence. As the 3rd day ended, it was clear that the balance of power had shifted completely. The alien mammoth creatures that had seemed invincible were now trapped and struggling against an enemy they could not understand or defeat. The birds had evolved beyond simple animal intelligence. The 4th day began with humanity's first real victory. So-Min watched through binoculars as a mammoth creature in downtown Seoul finally collapsed. It had been under constant bird attack for 18 hours straight. Thousands of birds had taken turns dropping stones, never giving the creature a moment of rest. "Target down," she reported into her radio. "The creature on 5th Street has stopped moving completely. Around the world, similar reports were coming in. The mammoth creatures, that had seemed invincible just days before, were falling one by one, but the birds were not finished with their surprises. Hyunwoo arrived at his office to find something that made him stop and stare. The birds had built a detailed model of the entire city using twigs, leaves, and stones. The model was accurate, down to individual buildings. Small red stones marked where mammoth creatures were located. Blue stones showed where human survivors were hiding. But most impressive were the white stones that marked planned attack routes and escape paths. The birds had created a complete battle plan for the entire city. Jin-ho was studying the model when Hyunwoo arrived. "They built this overnight," he said with amazement. "Look at the detail. They even included the subway tunnels and underground passages." Hyunwoo examined the model closely. The birds had marked weak points in the mammoth creatures' positions. They had identified the best locations for coordinated attacks. They had even planned backup strategies in case their primary attacks failed. "This is better than anything our military strategists could create," Hyunwoo said. "The birds understand urban warfare better than we do." At the military base, Tai-ho was implementing the first human-bird joint operation. Using information provided by Do-yeon and other children who could communicate with the birds, the military was finally able to support the bird attacks effectively. "Team Alpha, move to position 3, Tai-ho spoke into his radio. "The birds will begin their attack in 60 seconds. Provide covering fire to keep the creature distracted." So-min coordinated from the command center. For the first time since the invasion began, humans were not fighting alone. The birds had accepted human assistance and were sharing their battle plans. "Birds are in position," reported a soldier in the field. "Requesting permission to begin support fire." "Permission granted," So-min replied. "Remember, we're supporting them, not leading. Follow their attack patterns." The coordinated attack was beautiful to watch. Human soldiers fired at the mammoth creature from one direction, drawing its attention. At the same moment, hundreds of birds attacked from 3 other directions, hitting the creature's weak points with precisely aimed stones. The mammoth creature tried to defend against the human weapons while birds struck its vulnerable spots. Within minutes, the creature was stumbling and confused. Within an hour, it had collapsed completely. "Joint operation successful," Tai-ho reported. "Target eliminated." Chan-woo, a drone pilot, had developed new ways to support the bird attacks. His drones carried special containers filled with the specific stones the birds preferred. When birds ran out of ammunition, the drones would drop fresh supplies directly to their positions. "Stone delivery successful to Sector 7, Chan-woo reported. "The crows are reloading and preparing for another attack run." Mi Young, a materials scientist, had been working with A-Ra to understand exactly why certain stones were so effective against the mammoth creatures. Their research had led to an important discovery. "The alien creatures are not just animals," Mi Young explained to the research team. "They're biological machines. Their bodies contain metal components that react badly to specific mineral combinations." She showed them detailed analysis results. "The stones the birds are using create chemical reactions that interfere with the creature's internal systems. It's like the birds discovered the alien equivalent of poison." "But how did they figure this out so quickly?" A-Ra asked. "I think they're conducting chemical analysis through taste and smell," Mi Young replied. "Birds have much more sensitive chemical detection than humans. They can identify mineral compositions just by touching stones with their beaks." Do-yeon had become the primary communication link between humans and the bird intelligence network. She spent her days in the park, translating messages between the species. "The pigeons say 3 more big creatures are coming," Do-yeon told Yoonji. "They will arrive tomorrow morning, but the birds are ready for them." Yoonji had learned to take Do-yeon's translation seriously. The 8-year-old girl had proven more accurate than military intelligence at predicting alien movements. "What are the birds planning?" Yoonji asked. Do-yeon listened to the pigeon sounds for a moment. "They say they have a special surprise, something they've never tried before, but they need human help to make it work." The special surprise turned out to be the most ambitious bird operation yet attempted. Using their city model as a guide, the birds had planned a coordinated attack involving every species in Seoul. They want us to create loud noises in specific locations, Doyon explained. The birds will use the sounds to confuse the creatures and make them move to places where they can be attacked more easily. Tejo studied the bird battle plan with growing respect. This is a sophisticated psychological warfare operation. They're going to use sound to herd the creatures into kill zones. The operation began at dawn on the 5th day. Human teams positioned themselves around the city with loudspeakers, sirens, and other noise-making devices. At precisely 6 in the morning, they began creating the sounds the birds had requested. The mammoth creatures, already stressed from days of constant bird attacks, reacted exactly as the birds had predicted. They moved away from the loud noises, following routes that led them directly into areas where thousands of birds were waiting in ambush. "It's working," Somin reported from the command center. "The creatures are moving exactly where the birds wanted them to go." The ambush was devastating. The mammoth creatures walked into areas where birds had prepared concentrated chemical attacks. Instead of individual stone drops, the birds released clouds of toxic dust that surrounded the creatures completely. "Target 1 is down," came the field report. "Target 2 is retreating but under heavy attack. Target 3 has stopped moving." But the most impressive part of the operation was yet to come. The birds had learned to modify human technology for their own use. Crows had figured out how to operate simple machines. They used construction equipment to lift larger stones than they could carry themselves. "Look at this," Chanwu called to his team. "The crows are using a crane to position a boulder over the creature." The sight was almost comical. Several crows had learned to operate the crane's controls by pressing buttons with their beaks and feet. They lifted a massive stone high above a mammoth creature, then dropped it with perfect timing. Sparrows had discovered how to use human transportation. They rode on buses and trains to move quickly between attack locations. Some had even learned to operate simple vehicles by working together to press pedals and turn steering wheels. "The birds are using our own technology against the aliens," Hyun-woo observed. "They're turning human tools into weapons." The tide had clearly turned. Of the original 47 mammoth creatures that had landed on Earth, only 12 were still active. The others had been defeated by the relentless bird attacks, but the aliens were not finished. Late in the afternoon, Somin received a report that changed everything. "Ma'am, we're detecting new movement from the alien ships," her radar operator reported. "Something big is coming down." Through telescopes, they could see a single massive shape descending from the largest alien ship. It was much bigger than the mammoth creatures they had been fighting. This new creature was the size of a city block. "It's their ultimate weapon," Tejo realized. "They're sending something they've never had to use before." The new creature landed in the center of Seoul with an impact that shook the entire city. When the dust cleared, humanity saw their greatest challenge yet. The creature was like a mammoth creature, but 10 times larger. Its skin glowed with energy. Its eyes burned like stars. And most importantly, it seemed to be healing itself. Damage from the impact was disappearing as they watched. "It regenerates," Mi-young said with worry. "This creature can repair itself faster than we can damage it." The birds seemed to understand the threat immediately. Every species in the city began converging on the giant creature's location. But their usual tactics would not work against something that could heal itself. "The birds are gathering," Doyon reported. "All of them. Every bird in the city is coming. They say this is the final test." Hyun-woo watched through binoculars as millions of birds filled the sky above Seoul. Crows, sparrows, pigeons, seagulls, eagles, and dozens of other species formed a massive cloud that darkened the sun. "What are they planning?" he wondered aloud. Doyon listened to the bird sounds around her. Her face grew serious as she translated their message. "They say they're going to try something that has never been done before. They're going to work together as one single creature. All the birds in the world thinking and acting as one mind." The final battle was about to begin, and Earth's birds were preparing to show the aliens what collective intelligence could really accomplish. The final battle began at sunset on the 5th day. The massive alien creature stood in the center of Seoul like a living mountain. It was 3 times taller than the biggest building and covered in glowing armor that repaired itself whenever it was damaged. Hyun-woo watched from his office window as millions of birds filled the sky above the city. He had never seen so many different species working together. Eagles flew alongside sparrows. Hawks shared the air with pigeons. Even tiny hummingbirds had joined the massive gathering. "They're beautiful," Jinho said, standing beside him. Like a living storm cloud. The giant creature seemed to notice, the birds gathering above it. Its massive head turned upward, and its burning red eyes tracked the movement in the sky. But it did not seem worried. After all, what could small birds do against something so large and powerful? Duyan stood in the park below, surrounded by the few birds that had stayed on the ground to communicate with her. The pigeons, crows, and sparrows near her feet were making sounds she had never heard before. Their voices seemed to be joining together into a single, complex song. "They're all thinking as one now," Doyan told Yunji, who had stayed with her throughout the crisis. "Every bird in the world is connected. They're sharing the same thoughts." Yunji watched in amazement as the birds around Doyan moved in perfect coordination. When one pigeon turned its head, all the others turned at exactly the same time. When a crow took a step forward, every crow in the park made the same movement. "It's like they're parts of the same creature," Yunji whispered. At the military base, Somin coordinated with field teams positioned around the giant creature. Human forces had their weapons ready, but everyone knew this battle would be won or lost by the birds. "All units report ready," Somin announced. "Remember, we follow the birds' lead. Do not engage until they begin their attack." Taeho studied the giant creature through binoculars. "It's not moving yet. I think it's waiting to see what we do." "The birds are waiting too," Somin observed. "Maybe they're planning something that needs perfect timing." High above the city, the bird swarm had organized itself into a perfect spiral pattern. Different species had arranged themselves in layers, with the largest birds on the outside and the smallest on the inside. They moved as one, circling the giant creature like a living tornado. Ara and Mi Young had been working frantically in their lab, analyzing the stones the birds had been collecting all week. Their final discovery was shocking. "The birds haven't just been gathering random minerals," Mi Young explained to the research team. "They've been collecting the components for a massive chemical reaction." She showed them test results on her computer. If all these different stone types are combined and activated at the same time, they'll create a toxic cloud that could affect the giant creature's entire body. But they'd need to coordinate the release perfectly, Ara added. Every bird would have to drop their stones at exactly the same moment, in exactly the right pattern. "That's impossible," Jinho said. "No group of animals could coordinate something that complex." "Normal animals couldn't," Hyunwoo replied. "But these aren't normal animals anymore. They're something new." The attack began without warning. The spiral of birds suddenly tightened into a perfect circle directly above the giant creature. Every bird carried stones, but not the same type they had been using before. These stones were different colors and seemed to glow with their own light. The first wave dropped their stones in a precise pattern around the creature's feet. The stones hit the ground and immediately began fizzing and smoking. Strange colored vapors rose from where they landed. The giant creature looked down at the small chemical reactions around its feet and seemed amused. It lifted one massive foot and stepped on several of the fizzing stones, crushing them into powder. But that was exactly what the birds wanted. The second wave of birds dropped their stones directly onto the crushed remains of the first stones. When the different mineral types mixed together, they created a violent chemical reaction that sent clouds of toxic gas billowing upward. The giant creature breathed in the gas and suddenly staggered. For the first time since landing, it showed signs of pain. It roared and tried to wave the gas clouds away with its massive arms, but the birds were just getting started. Wave after wave of birds dropped stones in carefully planned sequences. Each group carried stones with different chemical properties. When the stones mixed with the previous drops, they created new reactions that built upon each other. "It's like a chemistry experiment," Mi Young said in wonder, watching through binoculars. "The birds are creating a chain reaction that gets stronger with each wave." The giant creature was now stumbling and shaking its head. The toxic clouds were affecting its ability to think clearly. Its regenerative powers were struggling to cope with the constant chemical assault. But the birds had saved their most impressive tactic for last. Du Yan suddenly stood up in the park. The birds around her had gone completely silent. She listened carefully to sounds only she could hear. "They're ready for the final attack," she announced. "But they need all the humans to help." "What do they want us to do?" Yunji asked. "Make noise. As much noise as possible. Right now." So-min received Do-yan's message through her communications team. She immediately broadcast to all military units and civilian shelters throughout the city. "All teams begin maximum noise generation now. Use everything you have, sirens, horns, loudspeakers, anything that makes sound." The entire city erupted in noise. Air raid sirens wailed. Car horns honked continuously. People banged pots and pans from their windows. Construction equipment added to the chaos with backup beepers and engine noise. The giant creature was already confused by the chemical attacks. The sudden explosion of sound from every direction made it panic. It spun around frantically, trying to locate the source of all the noise. That was when the birds struck with their final blow. Every bird in the sky dove toward the creature at the same time, but they weren't carrying stones anymore. They were carrying the most toxic mineral combinations they had discovered, concentrated into small packets they had created using their own saliva and gathered materials. Millions of birds hit the giant creature simultaneously, each delivering a concentrated dose of poison directly to its skin. The creature's regenerative system, already overwhelmed by the previous attacks, could not cope with the massive chemical assault. The giant creature let out a roar that shook windows throughout the city. Then it began to dissolve. Its glowing armor faded. Its burning eyes went dark. Within minutes, the massive creature had collapsed into a pile of harmless organic matter. "Target down," So-min reported with amazement. "The giant creature has been eliminated." But the birds weren't finished. With their victory, high above the city, they regrouped into their spiral formation and began climbing toward the alien ships still hanging in orbit. "They're going after the ships," Hyunwoo realized. "The birds are taking the fight to space." What happened next was the most incredible sight anyone had ever witnessed. The birds had somehow learned to survive in the thin atmosphere at high altitude. They carried with them the same toxic stone combinations that had defeated the ground creatures. The alien ships, confident in their orbital superiority, had no defense against millions of small creatures carrying chemical weapons. The birds found ways into the ships through ventilation systems and airlocks. Within hours, the entire alien fleet was dead or dying. "All alien vessels are going dark," So-min reported. "We're receiving no more signals from orbit." The Vorthak Empire, which had conquered 43 worlds with their biological weapons, had been completely destroyed by Earth's smallest defenders. In the days that followed, humanity learned the full scope of what had happened. The birds had not just defended Earth. They had somehow communicated with small creatures on other worlds that the Vorthak had conquered. Across the galaxy, tiny animals were rising up against their alien oppressors, using the tactics they had learned from Earth's birds. "It's a galactic revolution," Hyunwoo told the assembled world leaders during the post-victory briefing. "Earth's birds have taught every small creature in the galaxy how to fight back." Du Yan, now recognized as humanity's first ambassador to the Bird Intelligence Network, translated the final message from her feathered friends. "They say the war is over. The bad aliens are all gone. But the birds will keep watching the sky, just in case someone else tries to hurt Earth." The birds gradually returned to their normal behaviors, but they were forever changed. They remained more intelligent and continued to cooperate across species when needed. Humanity had gained protectors that would watch over Earth for generations to come. Hyunwoo often returned to his office window to watch the birds in the park below. They looked ordinary now, feeding and playing as birds always had. But he knew the truth. Earth was guarded by millions of small sentinels, each carrying stones in their beaks and the knowledge of how to use them. The Vorthak Empire had brought their deadliest mammoths to conquer Earth. But they had never imagined that small birds with simple stones could destroy an empire that had lasted for centuries. Earth was safe, and the galaxy would never be the same.